الله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الله أكبر، لله الحمد. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما، واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما، ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم، وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. Is the audio okay? So yes, we are in reading week, and I think it's not the reading week issue, because there was also, you guys now are spoiled because you have reading week first term and second term. My time, we only had it second term. So the reading week of I think first term, we had the if I'm not mistaken, the quiz that week, and a lot of people wrote the quiz, unless I'm mistaken about the day. But so I think maybe it's because it's a holiday. Wallahu alam. Nonetheless, for those who are missing, inshallah, I mean, the message comes clear through the recording. If you have any questions, obviously, about the topic, we can discuss it in the next class, which will be, inshallah, our last class. So next week is the very last class for part 1 of Tafseer. After that, inshallah, is Ramadan. And then if we're alive and well, inshallah, in September of the following academic year, we can have part 2, inshallah. In terms of housekeeping, I did mark all of the assignments, in-class assignments, and the midterms. I just don't know how to use the online system to communicate the marks. We used to do it easily through Google Classroom, but unfortunately, the new system, it's difficult. So what I'm planning to do, inshallah, is to, with the help of Sister Nada, will be communicating individually to each student through email what they got. So you'll get your marks through email. What I will do next time, inshallah, unless I forget, I will bring the exams with me and the in-class assignments for anybody who wants to look at their work, but I need them back. And the reason why I need them back is because I think some of the criteria to develop IDA into an accredited institution, we need to have evidence of assessments throughout the various courses, and so I need to keep those. But you will have access to them, and if you want to take photos of your answers and marks, you can do that too. Any questions before we start, inshallah? Right. So last week, we continued on with the third cluster of surah of Juzu Amma. Do you remember what the cluster talks about? What does this cluster address in Juzu Amma? So it says model or ideal conduct, but what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, how are you going to carry out yourself in terms of your perspective, your thinking process, how you react to life? So all these tools that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has taught the believers, it's available for humanity, but because these are divine tools that are taught by Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and a person can't come to their understanding without tadayyun. So a person without tadayyun, without an adoption of the belief system, will not understand these. And these are not concepts that the Arabs knew at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in the Quran to teach the believers and equip the believers with these tools to overcome the challenges of life and to have the right approach and perspective. So we talked about Surah Al-Tariq, which talked about the concept of tawakkul. We talked about Surah Al-A'la, which talked about the concept of tasbih. And if you want to, again, get more information about tawakkul and tasbih, the recordings are there. So please go back. I just don't want to spend too much time talking about these concepts all over again. And I think we did review them last week as well, or the week before even. And then we also covered after that Surah Al-Ghashiyah. And Surah Al-Ghashiyah talked about this concept of perseverance and patience. And it's, again, you say, well, patience and perseverance, we know what those are outside of Tadayyun. Well, no, this is the approach of Surah Al-Ghashiyah came to teach you how to think about these things. Yes, patience is an attribute or a quality that anybody that's non-Muslim would understand, but what do they understand about it? Being patient is to sit there waiting for results, being calm and collected, or is it something else? And we understand what that is now, based on Surah Al-Ghashiyah. And then last week, we covered a very beautiful surah, Surah Al-Fajr. It's one of my favorites in this juz'ah. And it's got two of the most important ayat in the Quran, as we talked about. It gave us proper perspective, a perspective that many people, if they lack, will fall on their faces when life hits. Because everybody goes through life problems. Everybody goes through challenges and difficulties. The rich, the poor, the healthy, the unhealthy, men and women, children and adults, everybody goes through difficulty in life. This is the nature of the hayat ad-dunya. And so how do you react to these situations? We talked about there are actions that lead to natural consequences, but we're not talking about those in Surah Al-Fajr. We're talking about you do everything in your power to get a result and you don't get it. We talked about the marathon runner that stayed healthy tried to be healthy all his life, and then in the age of 60 gets lung cancer, whereas his friend who smoked all his life doesn't get it. So, well, how do you explain that? How do you understand that? Here's so that you can act appropriately. Well, Surah Al-Fajr taught us anything good or bad labeled by humans, right, is a test, whether it's good or bad. It's all tests. The stamp that comes on a ni'mah or a niqmah, a difficulty or a blessing, nothing comes with that stamp. This is a blessing, this is a difficulty. We get to decide if it's a blessing or a difficulty by how we react. And that's what the test is. How are you going to perceive this? Are you going to perceive it as khayr? You're going to be content with it, and you're going to say, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I did all I can, and you gave me a result that I wasn't expecting. Alhamdulillah, I accept it. How do I improve? Or are you going to say, why, and start questioning and blaming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So we talked about the example of somebody who does, again, the driving example, or that's the studying example. Studies really hard, focuses, and gets the positive result. That's a natural consequence. Somebody who doesn't study, leaves it to the last minute, tries to cram, gets a bad mark. That's a natural consequence. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the person who studies really hard and then fails. Okay? Or the person who doesn't study at all and wings it every time and passes with flying colors. Because they're not natural consequences. Because at the end of the day, the results are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we said that the person who, it's a test for both. The test is for both. And the person who didn't do any work and keeps passing with flying colors all the time, scholars have said that person is atas an-nafs, the worst of people. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps honoring them when they're not doing their part. And they start thinking they start taking it as if it's themselves. And where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now again testing them. I'm testing you with a consequence that's that wouldn't be considered a natural consequence to your actions. And people could, and they ignore them and they say, oh, I'm doing well, I don't need to do work. We probably know people in life that say, I don't need to work hard, and they're making a nice six-figure salary, or they have a very easy lifestyle, and they're not doing much. And there are people that are busting every day and work 2-3 jobs and still can't pay off the rent. Both are tests. Right? Now, for the part of the natural consequence, these are also tests. In what way? In that I didn't study and I failed. The test is not that I failed. The test is, what am I going to do about it? That's where the test is. The failure is the natural consequence. But how are you going to carry yourself after that is the test. Are you going to crumble and blame and sulk in the corner, or are you going to change? Similarly, the person who passes when they studied and worked hard. What the test now becomes, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to start attributing it because of how intelligent you are, how smart you are, how gifted you are? Or is it back to Allah? There's where the test becomes. So the lesson is that everything is a test. There are things with natural consequences, but things that the natural consequence doesn't come, that's a clear test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what this surah came to teach us. Now, the one thing I didn't mention last week, and I didn't tie it to the oaths that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took at the beginning of the surah. Wal-Fajr, we talked about Wal-Fajr, Walayalin Ash. Fajr is obviously the daybreak, when you start seeing that white or red light start to appear after the darkness of the night. And then the 10 nights, وَالشَّفْعِ وَالْوَتْرِ, what's odd and what's even, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْ, and the night when it starts to move forward or pass forward. And so we talked about how Fajr, nights, and then the night moving, and then Fajr starts, and it's a cycle. If you think about it, it's the cycles of light and darkness, the ups and downs of life, right? The Fajr is like your break, you finally see the breakthrough, the positive results, right? And the nights are the challenges and the difficulties. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that there's cycles. Everybody goes through ups and downs. All of these ups and downs are tests, but there will be difficult times and there will be easy times. And there's so many examples, obviously with the Prophet ﷺ, with Sayyidina Yusuf ﷺ, many stories, and certainly we probably gone through a lot of ups and downs in our lives. That it's a very beautiful connection. We're talking about how Fajr and night, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the oath of those, and they are a cycle. Life is a cycle of ups and downs. Any question about Surah Al-Fajr before we move on to another beautiful surah? Okay, so we're going to talk about Surah Al-Balad. Now, Surah Al-Balad talks about a very important concept, and that is that ethics are constant. A human needs to have ethics that are constant. We know that life circumstances are variable. Life circumstances will always be changed. They're dynamic. They're never static. And life will come with its difficulties and real obstacles that we will need to overcome. But what we need to pay attention to is our ethical and moral consistency during these difficulties. Because, as we said, ups and downs, but what can't change are your ethics. What can't change are your principles. Those have to be constant. And this is what the surah teaches us. Surah Al-Balad is named, the majority say it's in the Mus'haf it's called Surah Al-Balad, but Sahih al-Bukhari and others have said, referred to it as Surah La Uqsim. So if you hear, Surah La Uqsim, it's referring to the surah, the first couple of words in the surah. Now, the context. The context of Surah Al-Balad. Now, what does Balad mean? Does anyone know? Yes, go ahead. Sorry? Country or city? Yes, I mean, it's both. In this particular case, it's talking about a city. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the oath by the city. But before we talk about that, let's talk about that city. And that city obviously is Mecca. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ had just lost his wife Khadija radiallahu anha, his internal support. He's lost Abu Talib, his uncle, his external support. He's just gone through 3 years of boycott and hopelessness in the people of Mecca. Not the Prophet wasn't feeling hopeless, obviously. Alayhi salatu wassalam endured a lot, but he kept going. But the people of Mecca basically was, you had the people, the believers, there are a few of them. Some of them migrated to Abyssinia. So the Prophet ﷺ had to look for other forms or other places for da'wah. So we know the story that he ﷺ went with Zayd ibn Haritha to Ta'if. And we know that story of Ta'if, the people rejected him. They sent their kids and their servants to throw rocks at him, ﷺ. He got injured. And they said really hurtful things to him, like, how would, if you were held on to the Kaaba and you swore that you were a prophet, we wouldn't believe you. That, and people said that you're not a prophet. If you're a prophet, you would be too good to talk to me. And if you're lying to me and you're not and you're not a prophet, then you're not worth my time. And just lots of hurtful things. And so one of the most hurtful things, though, was not just the reaction of Ta'if, but the people of Ta'if sent a message to the people of Mecca and said to them, Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam came to us, and he's trying to bring his da'wah here, and we rejected him. So what happened in Mecca is they forbade him from entering Mecca. Now, this is a big deal because Mecca is a haram. What does haram mean? Sacred, which means no person who wants to enter Mecca as a visitor is allowed to be stopped. This is the rules of the Arabs at the time, right? This is actually a rule established by Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam and continued all the way to the Prophet's time. So the people of Quraysh, yes, they dropped a lot of Sayyidina Ibrahim's kind of customs and rules, but this one stuck. Anybody who entered Mecca as a visitor was honored. This is part of it. You were not just welcome, you were honored. So nobody was allowed to be hurt or stopped from entering Mecca. This is for a visitor or a guest. Now, what about somebody who actually lives in Mecca, right? If a visitor is allowed to come and they'll be honored, well, if you're living in Mecca, then obviously you have more rights to Mecca than the visitor. So these rules, again, were established by Sayyidina Ibrahim, and so they forbade the Prophet ﷺ from entering. Now, the Prophet ﷺ wasn't just a resident of Mecca. His grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, is the one who dug up Zamzam after it was hidden for many, many years. His great-great-great-great-grandfather was Sayyidina Ismail, and he's from the lineage of Sayyidina Ismail, who started the place, right? So he's got lineage that started Mecca, that we know the story of Hajar alayhi salam and Ismail. Ismail grew up in Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ is the only prophet from the lineage of Sayyidina Ismail. All the other prophets are from Ishaq. Again, Ishaq and Ismail are sons of Ibrahim, and the Prophet ﷺ came from the lineage of Sayyidina Ismail. So Sayyidina Ismail was the very first person to live in Mecca with his mom. Abdul Muttalib dug up Zamzam, and the Prophet ﷺ had more rights to Mecca than anybody else. Right? Again, lineage was a big deal at the time of the Arabs. So when the Prophet ﷺ was asked, what is the most difficult or hardest day for you after Uhud? The Prophet ﷺ responded, he said, who told you that Uhud is the hardest day? He said, the hardest day is when I was in Qarn Thalib. That's a place between Ta'if and Mecca, and where he said, Ahimu ala wajhi. He described the situation as, I basically have no idea where I was going. Imagine, you're lost. You don't know where to go. Mecca won't let you in. Ta'if just rejected you. Where do you go? Where do you go? And I think the context here is really important for the surah. And so Zayd,
he was about 16 or 17 years old at the time. Is this acting up again? Yeah, it is. It's dead, I think.
So Surah Al-Balad came down around the same time as Surah Al-Duha as well then?
We're coming. No, Duha is different time.
Duha is different time?
Duha is when the revelation was
yes, sir. It's working. So I don't know how much of the audio is missing, but nonetheless. So we said that the Prophet ﷺ answered, and he said the hardest day of his life, ﷺ, was he was in Qarn Thalib, again, a place between Taif and Mecca, when he said, Ahimu ala wajhi, which is an expression that means I'm lost or not lost, I have no idea where I'm going. So he sent Zayd ibn Harith radiallahu anh, he was about 16 or 17 years old at the time, back to Mecca to see if somebody can take the Prophet ﷺ in his jiwar, under his protection, as was the custom. And nobody accepted, except for Al-Mut'im ibn Adi. He was not a believer. He had 10 sons, Al-Mut'im. And he accepted because he wanted somebody that, when you protected somebody in Mecca, that brought you status. So it brought him, it elevated his status in front of people. So the Prophet could only go back to Mecca under his jiwar or his protection. And this is the difficulty that the Prophet just to go back home experienced. This is when Surah Al-Balad was revealed. Okay? And this surah talks about the lessons the lesson that we have to learn is that constancy of ethics and values. Thabat ala al-qiyam. Thabat ala al-qiyam. Now again, we said there's a lot of mutaghayyirat in life, a lot of circumstances that change in life. One day you're sick, one day you're healthy, one day you might be rich, one day you're poor, one day that you have a friend, and one day that person is no longer your friend. Things change throughout life. But qiyam never change. Principles and ethics never change. They're not tied to changes in life. So life will happen, but the qiyam have to be constant. You can't be generous when you have a lot, but when you don't have a lot, you're stingy. That means you have no constancy in values, because generosity doesn't matter about your situation. You have or you don't have, you give, right? And it's not the quantity that you give, it's really the percentage of what you give, right? Because if I had $1 million and I gave, let's say, $1,000, okay, versus a date and I split in half and I gave half to somebody else, that half is worth more than the $1,000, right? So life has changes. Our situations will improve and then get worse and improve, as we know. And so these qiyam, if you really believe that you have principles and values, because we all can make these claims. I'm an honest person. I'm honest and truthful all the time. And so when it's easy to tell the truth, okay, but what if the consequences of telling the truth get you in trouble? Are you going to say the truth? And there's where that constancy of values is important. You don't have that's how you'll figure out if you have constancy. This is your evaluation for yourself, right? Somebody who prides themselves to be an honest student, hardworking, and earns all their marks fairly. When they're in a situation where they don't know what's going on in the exam or the assignment, what are they going to do? Cheat, look at other people's assignments, get a copy from last year, whatever students do these days, right? That's the test of how constant you are with your values. If the values change, like with life, then there's no constancy. And the important thing that the surah teaches us is that you have to maintain constancy. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you, based on your constancy. They say, and this is something actually, I may have mentioned this before, but when you're in the process of getting married, if you're marrying someone and you have not gone through difficulty with that person during your get to know each other stage, then you don't know that person very well. You'll never really know that person until you live with them, but you don't know them to the point where I think you can make a decision of marriage. You should experience difficulty together. And you'll see that person, how they behave and how you behave. And that will give you a more appropriate measure of how they truly are, if they have constancy in the values that they claim and that you heard about them. Or do you actually see that there's a problem? Okay. So yes, go through turbulence. Absolutely. People don't like to do that because people like to make everything smooth. And if there's no problem, create a problem. Really. I mean, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be obviously catastrophe, but make a problem to see how people will react. Because like you're gonna marry that person, you're gonna go through problems, guaranteed. There's no husband and wife that will go through life without the challenges. Same thing with your parents. Say, I have birr al-walidain. I honor my parents. I treat them very well. Yes, if your parents are amazing and they're kind to you and they're always always patting you on the back and making sure you have what you need. But what if they turn on you one day? What if they turn on you and they become harsh with you one day? Or they ask you to do something that you don't want to do, but it's difficult. Not haram, but it's difficult. Or they put extra stress on you. Because guess what? There will be a day that comes to. And that stress, we're not saying they're intending to do it, right? But when they get older, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give our parents good health. It's going to be difficult on them and especially on us. How does that change your birr towards them? If it doesn't, then you have constancy in birr. But if how you talk to them, how you treat them, how you think about them changes, you're going to need to reevaluate. So this is what the surah teaches. Let's start reading, inshallah ta'ala. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد ووالد وما ولد لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد أيحسب أن لن يقدر عليه أحد يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا أيحسب أن لم يره أحد ألم نجعل له عينين ولسانا وشفتين وهديناه النجدين. Okay, so try to cover half the surah because the second half is where we start the take-home message, inshallah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا أقسم بهذا البلد. So la here is not, so there's two different meanings of how you can take this. La here in this case doesn't necessarily mean no. Okay, la here is an article of tawkid or emphasis for the oath. Okay, the other meaning is to say not just an emphasis, but it could also mean no. There's no need. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, there's no need for me to take an oath or an uqsim, but I will take an oath. So both mean the same thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath to emphasize something. And both meanings are good. So it is an oath that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking by this city. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, La uqsimu, I swear by this city. What city? Mecca. How do we know? وَأَنْتَ حِلٌّ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ. You are حِلٌّ biha in this city. What's حِلٌّ mean? Well, we know that everything in Mecca is haram. Haram means you're not allowed to be harmed or hurt. Except, of course, in this case, Allah is saying to the Prophet ﷺ, except for you. وَأَنْتَ حِلٌّ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ. So Mecca is known to be a haram. Everything is haram, except it looks like you now have become halal. Right? And that's because what the people of Mecca decided. And Allah's basically saying to the Prophet ﷺ, you're the only one whose blood, whose wealth is halal, and you being harmed is halal. Although everybody knows that Mecca is haram. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, جَعَلَ اللَّهُ الْكَعْبَةَ الْبَيْتَ الْحَرَامِ قِيَامًا لِلنَّاسِ وَالشَّهْرَ الْحَرَامِ وَالْهَدْيَ وَالْقَلَائِدِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no one's allowed to be hurt or harmed. You're not even at the time of the Arabs, nobody called you names, put you down, let alone get killed anybody in Mecca. And the Arabs all knew this even before Islam, as we mentioned. And the Quraysh didn't want the rest of the Arabs to know that they were forbidding the Prophet ﷺ from coming in. Why? Because it lowers from their status from amongst the Arabs. It's embarrassing, actually. It's humiliating. Oh, Mecca is denying somebody from coming in? The Quraysh are denying their own person from coming in? What is going on? So they didn't want people to know. And so we already kind of talked about the context of the Prophet ﷺ, where he was in his life. ﷺ. Socially, he was weak, politically, economically, in every way, shape, and form. Again, we said that 3 years of the boycott, how many, very, very few people became Muslim. 3 years out of 13 in Mecca. That's a big percentage. That's you're about 25% of the time there. But at that time is about 33% of his dawah, and there's hardly anybody coming into Islam, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised that this is going to be a global message. So of course the Prophet believed in that, but you couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. So how is the Prophet ﷺ feeling? And I want you to think about that feeling. Yeah, so let's move on, inshallah, just for the sake of time, because it is Maghrib. Are they starting prayer now? Is there people? Is there anybody? Okay. So yeah, so why don't we then break here after the second ayah, and then we'll finish this, inshallah, right after that. Can we pause the بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So we covered the first two ayat, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath by the city, Mecca. لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد. And you are now, he's talking to the Prophet ﷺ, you are now halal in this balad. Halal meaning your blood is halal, your wealth is halal, your everything about you that isn't supposed to be is, because everything in Mecca by definition or by default is haram. So what's interesting here in this surah, are we talking about what? We're talking about constancy in values. Can you see that Quraysh does not have constancy in values? Right? It's very clear in the oath that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken. That here's an example where there is no constancy in value, because Mecca is always haram and they treated it, but now there's an exception. So they make an exception because it's fitting for them. And this is where you don't want to be inconsistent, is in your ethics and your values. وَوَالِدٍ وَمَا وَلَدٍ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by the father and that which was born of him. And there's another oath. This is another, after the first two oaths, this is the third oath. And this is, there's different interpretations by the scholars. Some have said this is Adam alayhi salam and his descendants. Some, so basically all of mankind. Some have said this is Ibrahim alayhi salam and his descendants. And some have said it's every parent and child. That which begets and that which is begotten. All alluding to, the process of reproduction, if, in that case. In our case, we're looking at it from the perspective of, again, the Prophet ﷺ. And as a reminder that this is another reminder, this ayah, is that your fathers and forefathers all lived in this balad. They all lived in this balad. They established this balad. They rediscovered Zamzam, etc. Your entire lineage is here, yet you're not allowed to enter. And so after the three oaths, what did we say is important about oaths? Two things. Yeah, so what the oaths are about, which we covered, what comes after them. So what comes after them? Here's the ayah that you need to highlight with different colors and make sure this is part of your psyche, this ayah. لَقَدْ خَلَقَنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. We have created the human, into constant difficulty. Kabad. Kabad is similar to kabid. What does kabid mean? Liver, right? Liver works day and night to clean your system, and the body can't live without it. Kabad is ongoing difficulty, and difficulty you're not going to avoid. It will always be coming. And so you think that Allah, after all of what happened to the Prophet ﷺ, would reveal ayat of comfort. But now, this is not comfort. It's saying, indeed, we have created humans in constant difficulty. This is not to soothe the Prophet. Like, this is not this is the reality of things, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving the Prophet some perspective. It's not necessarily giving him comfort that he would perhaps be looking for, alayhi salatu wasalam. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. So anytime, and it's not believers, it's insan, everybody will be in constant difficulty. So whenever you hit difficulty, just know this is part of life. لَقَدْ, emphasis, we have indeed, certainly created humans in difficulty. So life will come, and just remember this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised it. And this is an ayah that needs to be on our walls. أَيَحْسَبُ أَن لَّن يَقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ أَحَدٌ. Does human think, and so the translation here in this here says power over him, or so, does the human think that he will not have somebody with power over him or capable over him? So qudra in this case could mean capability or power. Or it could also mean, as we covered in Surah Al-Fajr, قَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقًا, qadar, right? Which is to constrict. And so you can also, this word of يَقَدِر could also mean constrict, which would mean then limits, right? So both meanings are right. You can adopt it as capable over him. Does human not think that there's nobody capable over him, or her, or it could mean does the human think that nobody can limit them? Okay, nobody can limit them. Yes.
It's dominion. I just like it's like kind of like control, but both outwards and inwards.
Sure. I mean, if we look at Surah Al-Qadr, that's Surah Al-Qadr, not Qadr, right? It's a bit different, but we'll come to that inshallah, and maybe in part 2, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the life to cover it inshallah. But in this case, you could either take it as power or capability over him, or somebody that would limit him. So does the human not think that there's anybody that can overpower or constrict or restrain or limit him, right? And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking a rhetorical question. أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ, does the insan not think? يَقُولُ أَهْلَكْتُ مَالًا لُبَدًا. أَهْلَكْتُ means spent. لُبَدًا means كثيرا, a lot. Right? So spent, vanished, or consumed, and a lot of it being consumed or vanished. So what this ayah is saying is, the person, the human, will say, I have spent so much in wealth and sustenance. يَقُولُ أَهْلَكْتُ مَالًا لُبَدًا. I have spent so much. I have so much to spend. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, and this is why the meaning of constrict here applies as well, because the previous ayah is saying, does he not think that there's something that's going to constrict him or limit him? Whereas he says, I've spent a lot. Well, I can keep spending. I have abundance. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَيَحْسَبُ أَن لَّن يَرَهُ أَحَدٌ. أَن لَّمْ يَرَهُ أَحَدٌ. That does the human think that nobody will see him or her? So that everything that the human has done, does he not think that it will all be recorded to the minutest of details? That the actions will not be seen. So we saw the beginning of the ayah talking about oaths, and telling the Prophet ﷺ that after these oaths, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. Human is created in constant difficulty, constant hardship. Yet the human continues to spend excessively thinking that nobody can constrict him or her, that nothing will limit him or her, and that nobody can see him or her. But of course, these are rhetorical questions, right? Yes, we all believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us all the time, right? But are our actions aligned with this? And this really needs reflection. If we truly believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us all the time, then why are some of our sins or mistakes intentional? We're all going to sin. We're all going to make mistakes. But why are some intentional? Knowing that they're wrong, but we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us. So why do we do it? It's not to challenge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's likely that we have a lacking in belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us. Because if we had full conviction, we would be too shy to do it, right? We'd be too embarrassed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us all the time. It's kind of like, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, to Allah belong the best of examples. If you have a kid, inshallah, in the future, they won't do anything wrong in front of you. Maybe they'll do something behind your back. And if they do something behind your back and they realize that now you know about it, they'll be afraid and they'll be embarrassed. That's natural. But what if your child knows that you can see him and does it anyway? That's a musibah. Now apply that وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how is it that we acknowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us, yet we commit sins while He's watching us? Something is not aligned. Something's missing. So these ayat we need to think about, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking it rhetorically, right? أَيَحْسَبُ, does the human not think that anybody can see him or her? Okay. And so then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the next ayah says, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ, have we not made for him and her two eyes? So how is it that the one who's created you and gave you eyes can't see you? How? It doesn't make sense. These eyes are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How is it that Allah gave me eyes to see, but He can't see me? Right? So, yes, you have the ability to see, but what about the one who created the heavens and the earth? Of course He can see. What logic is it otherwise? How much capability does He subhanahu wa ta'ala have when He's the one who originated you? And أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْنِ, have we not made for him and her two eyes and a tongue and two lips? Two of His most basic favors upon us, without which if you didn't have one of them, you would be severely disabled. The instruments of vision and speech. If God forbid we're missing any of them, it's a significant disability, and it will hinder you from doing a lot and have so much challenges. And these are just two basic favors. أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْنِ. And these are favors that I don't think most people thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, really. The eyes, subhanAllah. Yeah, it's like, you think if somebody offered you, let's say $1 billion, most people would say, tell me anything and I'll do anything for a billion. Say, well, I'll ask you to give me something for $1 billion, and that's your two eyes. Would you give me your two eyes for $1 billion? You wouldn't. What if you're poor, like you're living on the street? You still wouldn't give me your eyes. So, and this is just what? Money? Wealth? So if that's just the eyes, what about everything else? You can't buy anyone's eyes off of them. So what favors do we owe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. And we have shown him the two ways. Najd denotes a high or elevated ground or a mountain pass. Najd. And the dual form here indicates that basically you have two prominent paths that are clear and distinguishable. Two paths. وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. You have the clear right path and you have the wrong path. The path is elevated. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, described it as it's elevated, it's clear. It's not, there's no, I can't tell which, no, they're clear, right? They're not hidden. And so, because our circumstances may be hard or difficult, we have to ask ourselves, do we act out based on our desire? So if you're doing something, and you're supposed to be doing this thing, and then you come across a difficulty, how is your response? Is your response, nobody can limit me, I will spend my health the way I want, I'm not happy, I'm in a difficulty, nobody can tell me what to do, I can do whatever I want in this case, people need to back off, and I leave my purpose, I leave my goals, and I spend my time, my wealth, my provisions in any way, and nobody can tell me what to do. Because I have a right to do so. That's what people say these days. Because I have a right to feel better about myself. Well, Allah's teaching us in the surah, the insan is always in kabad. The insan is always in constant difficulty. So every human will taste difficulty, whether sickness and wealth and provision. And, you know, if you ask the rich if they're happy, they'll tell you no. Really. We think they're happy, but what you see on Instagram and social media is, as you know, is just what people are showing, what they want to show you. But the rich are not happy. And if you ask the poor, they'll also complain the same thing. They'll complain about not having what the rich have, but they'll still complain. And some people will have more trials than others, definitely. And this, if you remember, was revealed at the time when the Prophet ﷺ was being tested significantly. He ﷺ thought in his mind that this is the most difficult time. He said, ﷺ, this is the most difficult time. And all that bad that can happen to you and I, and like it happened to the Prophet ﷺ, we're going to go from one difficulty to the next because we're created in difficulty. Now, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do if we're in constant difficulty? We already learned a perspective, but that perspective in Surah Al-Fajr was connected to, you did what you could. Sometimes difficulties will come based on your actions, yes, and sometimes they'll just come out of nowhere, right? So what do you do? Let's continue reading, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم
الشيطان الرجيم
فلقتحم العقبة
عقبة
وما أدراك ما العقبة
كما العقبة
فك رقبة أو إطعام في يوم ذي مسغبة
في يوم ذي مسغبة
يتيما ذا مقربة
ذا مقربة
أو مسكينا ذا متربة
ذا متربة
ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة
الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة
أولئك أصحاب الميمنة
أصحاب الميمنة
والذين كفروا بآياتنا هم أصحاب المشأمة
بآياتنا هم
عليهم نار مؤصدة.
صدى.
So what do? You're in constant difficulty. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell you? فَلَقَتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ. Before I talk about the meaning of aqaba, اقتحم اقتحم is to break through. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in this ayah that He has not broken through the difficult path, is how it's translated. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you what, the next ayah, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةَ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةَ. And what do you know about this breaking through of this difficult path? So we said already, human is in constant difficulty. Instead of falling into what's permissible, and instead of thinking nobody can constrict him or limit him or overcome him, or is capable over him, instead of thinking nobody can see him, then what should they do? اقتحم العقبة. Aqaba is the matter that comes between you and your goals. The things that you want to accomplish in life, these are the barriers that sit and the hurdles and the obstacles between you and your goals. So فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةَ is the response to how you should deal with difficulty. When you experience difficulty that you're going to experience constantly, right? Kabad. How you should react is blow or break through these obstacles. So what does that mean? What does that really mean practically? And how do I know what are my obstacles? فَلَقَتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةَ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and what do they know? What does one know about breaking through the difficult path? فَكُّ رَقَبَةٍ أو إطعام في يوم ذي مسغبة. So what is breaking through these barriers? It is freeing a slave, or feeding on a day that's severe, a day of severe hunger. Or and then it continues on, يتيما ذا مقربة, an orphan of near relationship, ذا مقربة, close to you, has a close relationship to you. أو مسكينا ذا متربة, or a needy person that's in misery. So what is it saying to us, right? This is saying that when you hit difficulties, how do you get out of your difficulty? اقتحم العقبة. Break through these obstacles that are standing between you and your goals. In this particular case, it's talking about freeing the slave and feeding the poor and the hungry on a really bad day, and being there for the orphan when they're close to you, when they're actually you have a tie, familial tie with them, or a needy person in misery. So, and by the way, masghaba here means severe hunger. Yatiman dha maqraba is an orphan that's related to you, and we said about the orphan is symbolic for somebody that may have food and money, but they lack what? Social supports, right? They don't have the social support. And so yatiman dha maqraba. So yes, it's the orphan, but also more general, it's somebody who lacks social support. Aw miskinan dha matraba. Miskin is a person who lacks what? Financial support, right? Dha matraba. Matraba comes from turab. What's turab? Is soil or like mud, right? It's how poor this person is, that they're basically sitting on the side of the street because they're homeless, and they have dust all over them. We've seen homeless people, unfortunately, right? How they look, right? And they have dust covering them. أو مسكينا ذا متربة. So what's this telling us? So if you're doing khayr, if your goals are set and you're working through your goals that are meant to benefit and value and impact, and you're doing khayr, you will continue to do them despite your circumstances, because you have constancy in values, because you have constancy in ethics. The Prophet ﷺ was the best to give in charity, yes? The Prophet ﷺ always was there for the orphan and the needy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him to do things that he's already doing. Orphan, needy, poor, but the Prophet is already doing them. Continue to do them. Don't let your life circumstances, because they're poor, because they're difficult, because human will always be in difficulty, stop you from continuing to do what you ought to do. Stopping you from the khayr you're doing, the goals you're trying to achieve. Because you have constancy in principles. Those don't change. Oh, it's difficult now, I lost this and this and this, I'm no longer going to do this. I don't have the time, I don't have the energy. But you have constancy in values, you would continue. You would continue. Like we said, is your generosity tied to your circumstance? Because if it is, then you don't have constancy. Okay. Again, somebody might have a lot of money and they say, I don't eat from haram. And my kids, I don't feed them anything haram. But now when times are tough, what do? You steal? You take what's not rightfully yours or unlawful to feed your kids? Okay. Would you still avoid eating the haram? That's the question. So your values, your principles, your akhlaq don't change even if the tide is against you. This is what the surah is teaching us. And it's telling to the Prophet ﷺ, Fakku raqaba, free a slave. The Prophet ﷺ did that. He fed the needy. He helped the orphans. The Prophet was the best at all of these. And this reminders came. فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ, break through the barriers. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْعَقَبَةِ. And what do you know of the barriers? Do these things that you've always been doing them. Keep doing them. Even if you're in difficulty, even if you have no social support, no financial support, no support in Mecca, they kicked you out, keep doing them. Keep doing them. You can't use your difficult situation as an excuse to not to maintain your values. Because your values should always be constant. Because the human's always in kabad. So if you're not going to have constant values, well, half the time, let's say assuming 50-50 of ease and difficulty in life, then how do you have the right to say I'm principled? Okay. And what's astonishing is the Prophet never changed even with these practices. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them continue. Right? What did the Prophet do when he came back to Mecca? To conquer Mecca. Right? He had his head down, right? He's coming into Mecca. Complete humility. And he said, اذهبوا أنتم طلقاء, right? Just, you're free to go. You're all free, people of Mecca. They were all under his power. He could have ordered anything to these people that tortured him and forbade him from entering and wanted to kill him. Why? Because the Prophet has constancy in values. He didn't want to, there's no revenge. He doesn't want to avenge anything because there's constancy. ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة. We'll wrap up really quick here, inshallah. And then this has two meanings, and being among those who believed and advised one another in patience and advised one another in compassion. Those are أولئك أصحاب الميمنة. These are the companions of the right. So this ayah 17 has a couple of meanings. It could mean that if you لو اقتحمت العقبة, then you're of those who believe and advise. Okay, you would fit in that category. Or no matter what the believers, this could also mean, or no matter what the believers go through in life, through its difficulties, they will continue to always advise each other. وتواصوا. Tawasaw means, we'll see in Surah Al-Asr as well, to advise you, me, and you. It's mutual. It's not just advice one way. It's a two-way form. And that's how we're commanded to treat the deen, through a two-way. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْمَرْحَمَةِ. So it's interesting because the first two things that go away when you encounter a difficulty are what? Patience and compassion. Patience and compassion. So we always want a solution to our problem right away. We don't want to be patient. And then when we are going through a problem, what we lose is compassion. The mercy disappears. You look at yourself and ask yourself, how upset do you get when you're in difficulty? Just, reflect on it. How do you react to your family members or your friends when you're going through something, right? Do you say, oh, I'm just stressed, Yeah, they have no idea what's going on with me, and you treat them, poorly. And honestly, we're all guilty of this. And I'll put my hand up. It's difficult. It's difficult, but and this is why it's tawasaw, reminding each other for patience and compassion. Because we'll miss it. We're not perfect. We're not, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ثُمَّ كَانَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. They'll be of those who believe and do these things. And those are the people, the companions of the rights. أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ الْمَيْمَنَةِ. So ask yourself, how does does my patience go away? Does my compassion go away? Does my smile go away? Does my adab go away? Because if they go away, ask yourself, do I have, again, constancy in values? This is a tough surah. Because if you reflect upon it, you say, I don't think I'm doing very well. Because you can't use these excuses on their judgment. I lost my patience, oh Allah. I lost my compassion. I was going through difficulty. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. You're in constant difficulty. What do you expect? You're going to come through difficulty after difficulty. And the only way to prove yourself is if your values don't change. And I've said this already a million times. But it's just the connection and how all these ayat connect to that theme is just beautiful. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِنَا هُمْ أَصْحَابُ الْمَشْأَمَةِ. And those who disbelieve in our signs, those are the companions of the left. عَلَيْهِمْ نَارٌ مُؤْصَدَةٌ. So those who reject the message are the companions of Mash'ama. Mash'ama is the true disaster on the day of judgment. In dunya, you were not in Mash'ama. You were in kabad, like everybody else. But if you can't survive that kabad, and may Allah protect us, then there is Mash'ama on the day of judgment. عَلَيْهِمْ نَارٌ مُؤْصَدَةٌ. They have a fire that's mu'sada. Mu'sada is closing in on a person. May Allah protect us from that punishment. That kind of wraps up the surah. But there's many examples we can ask ourselves for consistency. Academic integrity, being in university, and dedication. When your marks are low in a course and there's a risk that you're going to lose a scholarship, what do you do? Ask yourself, what would I do? Would I continue to do the right thing, or would I perhaps plagiarize or copy or cheat? This is where we can all sit here and say I'm constant, but constancy is only learned through difficulty. Okay, I'm always kind and help others. But when those people get something you've always wanted and worked so hard for, and they didn't, and they got it and you didn't, how do you treat them? Right? How do you treat them? How do you look at them? So I hope that was a benefit. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who are constant in values. But we really need to, look at life this way, that it is constant battles that we're going to go through. But the answer to all of this, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةَ. What are your goals? What is the khayr you're doing? Continue to do it, especially if you are a person of consistent principles. With that, inshallah, we'll open it up to questions before we close. Yes.
What's exactly when somebody is going through something and then that really puts them to test? And I definitely agree with you on that. How do you think one can improve on their reactions while going through difficulty? Like, I understand we should not act that way. Do you have any advice on how to change the way we act?
Yeah, I mean, this is not an on-off button that you press and all of a sudden you respond. So obviously learning is important, but then you have to start living with this. So how do you live with this? You have to remind yourself of these things through ease and difficulties. And it has to become really part of your psyche so that becomes an automatic response. It may not be right now, but I have to remind myself, and this is why it's important. This is why we all struggle with this, but when we run into a difficulty, we turn back to the Quran. And people say, oh, turn back to the Quran, but really, the solutions are there. They are. We just have to really understand them, reflect upon them, and then really adopt them, internalize them. When you internalize these things and they become how you see the world, you don't have to, yes, difficulties of various degrees, and there's more and more difficult scenarios that will require more effort and more reminders. And sometimes we need reminders. The Prophet needed reminders. We're humans. That we build these antibodies, and this takes practice, and this takes constant reflection. So I would say my answer, it could be a longer answer, but really starting with reflecting and really internalizing this. And, you know, and then, you know, and then not having the arrogance that when we're going through something and somebody reminds us that we say, you know what, you're right. Because human, at the point when they're going through difficulty and people offer something, and people genuine, we're going to assume they're genuine, right? The answer you give, nobody knows what I'm going through. Well, that's also, I mean, don't be so, you know, so arrogant to say that, right? Because we don't know what people are going through. Some people are going through a lot harder. They are, but they just don't show us. And just remind yourself that the best of people, them, had to go through a lot harder. I don't know if that was helpful or not. Man.
Kind of on the same topic. I would say, and at least for me personally, obviously I do have a lot of stuff to reflect on. But when it comes to a lot of goals in my life, when I look back at them or look forward at them, actually, I find that I'm trying to head towards an area where I'm not covered, right? But if it's it's an aspect of the dunya where رقم إنسان في كبد. How what recommendations would you have in order to shift the perspective? Am I trying to change my perspective to how am I going to live with kabad?
No, so the default is you're going to be in kabad, right? So you have a responsibility to try to get out of the kabad. Nobody's saying, again, we're not saying sit there and accept it. But there are certain things you're going to have to accept. Like that's a mahallah, a death in the family. You're not going to bring them back, right? That's a mahallah, somebody gets diagnosed with something. I mean, you could go and try to get treated and get, you know, different, opinions from different doctors. You should do everything in your power. But there are some things that you have to accept they're out of your control. How do you respond to that? Keep constant with your values. Don't lose your patience. Don't lose your mercy. Don't lose your goals. Don't lose what your focus is. Keep going.
What I'm saying now is then our goal is to avoid consequential kabad as a result of our own actions, but our other goal is to also be able to do
But you can't. I mean, you could try to run away from kabad, but you won't, right? You can try to improve your situation, right? So the people of Gaza are a prime example. They've lost everything, but look at them. I don't know if you've seen any footage on Al Jazeera or any of the even social media. They're thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala till this day. They're sitting there cooking meals under the rubble. And they're trying to bury their dead. And they're trying to continue to move and forward. They're still memorizing Quran. Like it's just an incredible lesson for all of us. So I mean, there's certain things, yes, you try to get out of them, but in the process, don't lose your principles. Jazakumullah khair. Next week will be our last class, inshallah ta'ala. And I'll try to remember to bring the exams back. With that, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
Anything here or? Good. This was unflattering.
Yeah,
I would say, just toss out the rubber, like the cap, and leave that in, just so they know it's.
It's old.
Yeah, because you can't dump the batteries right in the garbage.
Oh, that's true. You guys have a place to put batteries?
They come in to collect them. I know most of the processes, there's two batteries and doors. Make the ones that are still good in the bottom.
They should be using rechargeable